The morning room at Ashford Park held the particular stillness of a house that had decided, long before Eliza Hartwell arrived in it, exactly what kind of woman she was. She stood near the window, while Lady Dorothea Ashford arranged herself on the velvet settee with the careful deliberateness of someone conducting a review rather than receiving a guest. Cecily Vane sat at the dowager's right hand, her pale yellow gown freshly pressed, her posture a quiet declaration. The solicitor's letter rested on the low table between them, its seal already broken. And what Eliza heard next she was not meant to hear at all. "The engagement will be announced at the midsummer ball," Lady Dorothea said, her voice carrying easily through the half-open door. "William will not object. He rarely objects when the arrangement is presented correctly." A pause, and then, "As for the charity case with the debt brother, she may be given a week's notice. She has served her purpose." Eliza's hand found the window frame. Outside, the grounds of Ashford Park lay green and indifferent in the late June light. Her brother Thomas would be in the gallery at this hour, running his fingers along the gilt frames of the Ashford portraits, asking questions no 9-year-old should need to ask about what would happen to them next. She had her answer now. She did not move from the window for a long moment. The glass was cool against her palm, and she held that coolness with the steadiness of someone who has learned to take comfort from very small things. What she did not yet know was that the letter she would write before dawn would travel no further than the hall below, and that a man who had not wept in 33 years was about to learn what it cost to let someone walk away. She arrived in London in late April with a trunk that had belonged to her mother, a letter of introduction from a distant cousin, and £3,200 of her father's debt recorded in a solicitor's ledger in Chancery Lane. Her brother Thomas walked beside her with his coat brushed neat and his jaw set at the angle that meant he was frightened, but intended not to show it. He was 9 years old and had already learned that lesson from her. The cousin, Mrs. Alderton, received them in a narrow house in Wimpole Street, with the particular brand of charity that arranges itself to be noticed. She was kind in the way of people who expect gratitude to come at regular intervals, and she spoke of the season's balls with the confidence of someone distributing gifts. There was, she explained, one invitation already obtained: the Whitmore House Ball, where all of proper London would assemble, and where a well-placed introduction might do a great deal for a young woman of Eliza's circumstances. What she meant was, a girl without fortune needed to be seen before her lack of it became the first thing anyone noticed. Eliza understood. She had been understanding such calculations since her father's illness made them unavoidable, and she had long since stopped expecting the world to offer her what it offered without question to girls in diamonds and freshly laundered gowns. She wore her mother's gray silk, altered twice at the hem and once at the sleeve, and pinned a small white cameo at her throat, and told herself that the cameo had been her father's gift, and was therefore worth more than anything in this room. The Whitmore House Ball was held on a Wednesday evening in the first week of May, when London had gathered itself into the full bright machinery of the season. The entrance hall blazed with candles. Women moved in clusters of satin and pearls, their fans deployed with the precision of veterans. Eliza came in behind Mrs. Alderton, her gray gown neat and entirely, obviously plain among the satins, and she kept her chin level and her hands still, and watched the room with the quiet attention of someone who has learned that observation is safer than participation. It was Mrs. Alderton who first said the words. She said them to a woman she knew near the supper-room entrance, and she said them in the tone of comfortable explanation. Poor thing, she has 3,000 and more in debt against her father's name, and a young brother besides. A charity case, really, but one does what one can. The woman she addressed nodded with the brief sympathy of someone who has already moved on. Eliza, 3 feet away, held her fan at the correct height and let the sentence wash past her as though it had not entered her body through the sternum and lodged there. It was at Whitmore House that she first saw William Ashford, the Duke of Ashford, and she noticed him the way one notices a specific quality of silence in a noisy room. He stood at the far end of the ballroom near the terrace door, alone in the particular way that men of extreme rank are alone, the crowd organizing itself around him at a polite distance. He was 33 years old, dark-haired, and composed in a manner that seemed less like calm than like something very carefully maintained. His face gave nothing. His jaw was set with the straightness of long practice, and his eyes moved across the room with the detached attention of a man who was present by obligation and entirely absent by preference. He looked at her once. She could not have said why she was certain of it, since his expression did not change, and his gaze moved on as quickly as it had arrived. She turned back to Mrs. Alderton and spoke of the weather, and told herself it had been a random survey of the room and meant exactly nothing. She was wrong, but she would not know that for some weeks yet. The weeks at Ashford Park began when Mrs. Alderton, through an arrangement Eliza was not fully shown, agreed to release Eliza into the household as an unofficial companion to the Dowager Duchess. Lady Dorothea required, as she explained in a letter that brooked no clarification, a woman of breeding and discretion to assist with correspondence and household management during the season. The fee was modest enough to suggest that Lady Dorothea considered herself the beneficiary of some obligation Eliza owed, and generous enough that Eliza could not reasonably refuse it. She arrived at Ashford Park in the 3rd week of May, Thomas beside her again, his coat brushed again, his face carrying the same careful composure. The estate stood 12 miles from London on a rise above a river, its long stone facade pale in the afternoon light, its grounds the kind of grounds that require a staff of 9 to maintain. A footman named Graves showed them to their rooms. Eliza's overlooked the kitchen garden. Thomas's was down the hall, and he pronounced it satisfactory in the tone of a man of 30 rather than a boy of 9. Lady Dorothea received her in the blue drawing-room the following morning and reviewed her in the manner of someone checking an inventory. The dowager was a handsome woman past 60, with silver hair arranged without softness and eyes that calculated everything they rested on. She explained Eliza's duties in 3 sentences, introduced Miss Cecily Vane, who was staying as a house guest, and who curtsied with the precise warmth of someone who has been coached on that precise gesture, and then dismissed them both with a turn of her fan. Cecily was 20 years old, the daughter of a baronet, and had been told since childhood that she was exactly the right sort of person for exactly the right sort of situation. She was kind to Eliza in the measured way that confirmed rather than questioned the distance between them. The Duke of Ashford was present at Ashford Park in the way that weather is present. You did not arrange your day around him, but you were always aware of whether he was in the house. He moved through the estate on a private schedule, appearing at breakfast briefly and at dinner formally, and conducting himself in the spaces between with the efficiency of a man who has reduced his domestic life to the fewest possible interactions. He addressed Eliza as Miss Hartwell. He addressed Thomas not at all for the first week, and then one afternoon crossed the hall to correct the boy's grip on the banister without breaking his stride. He asked her one question in the first 10 days. He had come into the library at 8:15 in the morning, and she was already there, reading a letter from the cousin's solicitor with the concentration of someone parsing a document that will alter her available options. She folded it quickly. He looked at the fold, not at her face, and said, "Is there anything in that letter requiring assistance from this household?" "No, Your Grace," she said. "Nothing of consequence." He looked at her then, for 3 full seconds, long enough to be something other than a glance, before he crossed to the desk and sat down to his own correspondence. It was nothing. She noted it and put it aside. If you have stayed this far with Eliza's story, you know already what it costs a woman to carry that kind of silence on her own. If Eliza's particular quiet has found its way to you, stay a little longer. There is more to see. The household had been running for 3 weeks before Thomas tested the boundary that Eliza had spent his entire life trying to hold steady. He had been told not to enter the East Gallery before noon, when the footmen had finished their duties there, and on a Tuesday morning he entered it at 11:15 because he had found a small painted miniature of a horse on the corridor windowsill and wanted to restore it to wherever it belonged. Lady Dorothea found him in the gallery with the miniature in his hands. What followed was not precisely cruelty. Eliza had learned to recognize the difference between cruelty and the exercise of a position, and what the dowager brought to bear on a 9-year-old boy who had not been invited to be in this house at all was something between the two. Her voice did not rise. It was precisely controlled, and that precision was its particular quality of damage. She told Thomas that he had been brought to Ashford Park by an arrangement made for his sister's benefit, that he was not a member of this household and should conduct himself with an awareness of that fact, and that the miniature was not his to touch. Thomas did not cry. His chin came up at the familiar angle, and he held the miniature out in both hands with the careful gravity of someone returning something they had never intended to keep. His face was white. Eliza came through the gallery door and was across the room before she had finished the thought that would have advised her to stop. She took the miniature from Thomas's hands and placed it on the side table herself. She kept her voice entirely level. She said, "Thomas came into the gallery because he found this on the windowsill in the corridor, Lady Dorothea, and wanted to see it returned safely. He could not have known the household schedule. I should have explained it better." A beat, and then, "He will know for the future." Lady Dorothea's eyes moved from Eliza to Thomas to the miniature. Something in her face adjusted, not softening, but recalibrating. She retrieved the miniature, tucked it into her sleeve, and left the gallery without speaking again. Thomas waited until the sound of her skirts was gone down the corridor, and then he let out a breath that was slightly too loud, and looked at his hands. Eliza put her hand on the back of his neck, briefly. What she did not see, because she had been watching Thomas and then the door through which the dowager had left, was the figure standing still at the far end of the gallery. William had been there since before Thomas arrived. He had come in from the garden entrance and stopped at the sight of the boy at the window, intending to pass through quickly. And then the dowager had appeared, and he had stood entirely without moving against the east wall. He saw all of it. He watched Eliza cross the room. He watched her voice stay level when she must have been burning. He watched her take the damage meant for Thomas onto her own account, without a moment's hesitation. And something in his chest performed a particular operation that he did not have immediate vocabulary for, because it had not happened in 4 years. He left through the garden entrance, and Eliza never knew he had been there. The solicitor, Mr. Aldous Pryor, arrived at Ashford Park on a Thursday in the 2nd week of June. He was shown into the Duke's study, and the door was closed for 2 hours. Eliza, whose duties took her through the adjacent corridor that morning, heard the dry murmur of legal particulars through the paneling without distinguishing words. She learned later, from Graves, that the matter concerned an entail irregularity connected to a property in the west of the county. She did not connect it to herself. She had no reason to. The evening after Pryor's visit, William found her in the kitchen garden at the end of her duties. She was there because the kitchen garden was the one place on the estate she could walk without being observed from the principal windows, and she sometimes came there in the early evening to stand in the smell of something growing and to permit herself a few minutes without the performance of composure. He came around the corner of the herb border and stopped when he saw her. And for a moment they were both simply there. in the early evening light, with nowhere particular to direct their attention except each other. "Miss Hartwell," he said. "Your Grace." She turned back to the rosemary bed. "I was about to go in." "Prior tells me," he said, and then stopped. She waited. He had a way of pausing that was not hesitation, but preparation. The way someone moves their weight before they lift something. "Prior has brought to my attention that your father's estate carried a debt recorded against the Hartwell name with a creditor connected to this household." She went still. £3,200, he said. The words were exact. She had not expected them to be exact. "An irregularity in the original documentation," he continued, "has been identified. Prior is of the view that the debt is legally unenforceable and should have been discharged at your father's death. He will confirm this in writing." Eliza kept her eyes on the rosemary. The evening smelled of it, and of something cooler underneath. The river, perhaps, or simply the approach of a summer night. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. It was not a careful question. She had not had time to make it careful. He was quiet long enough that she turned to look at him, and what she found on his face was not what she expected. Not the composed distance she had catalogued across 6 weeks. There was something else there, a specific attention, the way a man looks when he is trying to say something accurate and knows that accuracy has never been adequate for the thing being described. "Because you should not be carrying it," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. He did not look away. She asked quietly, "The debt or something else?" And he said, before he could prevent it, "Both." The silence that came after that held for several seconds. He broke it first. "Because she would not have. My wife died 4 years ago," he said. "Her brother Hugh Denning told me after her death that she had been unhappy for most of our marriage, that she had told him things she could not tell me, things that suggested I had been present in every formal sense and absent in every sense that mattered." His voice was entirely flat, the way a surface is flat when considerable effort has been applied to make it so. "I have had 4 years to consider whether he was correct. And," Eliza said, "I've concluded that he may have been partially correct, and that he delivered the assessment in the worst possible faith." A brief pause. "It changed nothing about the weight of it." Eliza stood in the kitchen garden in the gray evening and looked at a man who had sealed himself inside 4 years of formal distance and said, "The weight does not get lighter by being carried alone." He looked at her. He looked at her the way someone looks at a door they had decided was permanently closed. "No," he said, "it does not." He left without another word, and she stood in the darkening garden for a long time after, and admitted to herself, quietly and with some alarm, that she had been wrong about him from the beginning. There are moments in a season when the machinery of a household accelerates in the particular way that means a decision has already been made elsewhere and is now being executed. Eliza felt it in the final week of June. The Dowager was sharper at breakfast, more deliberate in the arrangements she commissioned for the midsummer ball, more particular in her management of Cecily's presentation. The flowers ordered were in the Vane family's preferred colors. The seating plan was revised twice. A new piece of music was rehearsed in the drawing room at a volume intended to carry through the house. Eliza wrote 3 letters for the Dowager and addressed 17 invitations, and said nothing. On the morning of the 22nd, she came to the morning room with the corrected seating arrangement and arrived at the door when it was 3/4 open. Cecily was already inside, seated beside the Dowager, both of them with their heads inclined over a document that Eliza recognized, from the shape of the seal, as something issued from a solicitor's office. "He will not be pleased," Cecily said, with the careful tone of someone who knows she has the right to anticipate someone else's displeasure as though it were a weather pattern. "William is never pleased," Lady Dorothea said. "That is not the point. The point is that a formal announcement before witnesses becomes its own authority. He will accommodate it." She set the document down with finality. "The charity case with the debt brother has been convenient, but the season does not wait for convenience." Eliza withdrew from the door. She stood in the corridor with her back to the wall and the seating arrangement in her hands, and understood with total clarity that nothing she had done in 6 weeks had changed the essential calculation of this household. She had her duties for the remainder of the day. She performed them. She helped Cecily dress for dinner and kept her expression at its working pitch, and she went to check on Thomas at 6 o'clock and found him asleep over his book, his face in the particular slackness of a child who had decided the day could be finished with. She sat on the edge of his bed and looked at him for a long time. The midsummer ball opened the great rooms of Ashford Park to assembled guests at 8 o'clock in the evening, and what Eliza witnessed before 9:30 confirmed what she had heard through the morning-room door. Lady Dorothea brought the room to a particular quality of attention with the practiced authority of someone who has arranged public moments all her adult life, and she stood beside William with her hand on his arm, and Cecily stood on his other side in her white gown. And the dowager spoke with warm, deliberate pleasure about a matter of some happiness for the family. And the guests turned their faces toward William and Cecily with the polite expectation of witnesses. Eliza was near the east wall with a glass she had not touched. A woman beside her, someone's aunt from a neighboring estate, leaned in with the comfortable intimacy of shared observation and said, "The charity case, isn't it? The companion. Well, one does feel for her. The season will not have her." William from across the room did not look at Eliza. He was looking at the floor 3 feet in front of him with the expression of a man managing a very specific internal situation. Eliza set her untouched glass on the nearest tray and walked out of the room. She packed methodically, the way she had learned to pack in the months after her father's death, when the house in Derbyshire was being assessed for creditors, and everything that remained of their former life needed to be reduced to what 2 people could carry. Her mother's trunk again. Thomas's smaller case, the cameo pinned and then unpinned and laid in the velvet pocket, because she could not wear it tonight, and she could not leave it either. She wrote the letter at 2 in the morning, at the small desk under the eave window. She wrote it to no one in particular, which made it harder and more honest. She wrote about Thomas, and about what she had hoped might be different, and about the kitchen garden in the gray evening, and about £3,200 that apparently did not exist anymore, and what it felt like to have been carrying something that long for no reason. She wrote about the gallery and the miniature. She wrote, "I believe you are a better man than the one you have been practicing being. I hope you will find cause to believe it also." She signed it with her full name. She sealed it with the small candle on the desk. She addressed it to William Ashford, Duke of Ashford, because formality was the last courtesy she had available. She left it on the hall table at 4:30 in the morning, woke Thomas with a hand on his shoulder and the quiet instruction to dress, and carried the first case down the stairs herself. She was at the bottom of the stairs with Thomas beside her and the second case in her hand when the door to William's study opened. He was still dressed. He had the letter in his hand, and he had clearly been holding it for some time, because the seal was broken and the paper was slightly creased where he had gripped it. He looked at Eliza the way a man looks at something he has understood too late and cannot pretend otherwise. She said, "I am not dismissing myself, Your Grace. The arrangement has simply run its natural course." His jaw moved once. He said, "Please wait." "I have Thomas," she said. "I cannot simply wait in a corridor because it is convenient." "I know," he said. "I know you have Thomas." and he looked at the boy, who was watching him with the flat, alert gaze of a 9-year-old who has learned that adults say things in moments like this that matter for a long time afterward. Something in William's face changed at Thomas directly, a recognition, as though the boy's presence here at 4:30 in the morning with his coat buttoned and his jaw set confirmed something William had already calculated. He said, "Come into the drawing room. There is something that requires witnesses." She was going to refuse. She had spent long enough in this house to know that when things required witnesses, the witnesses were generally not there for her benefit. He saw the refusal forming, and he said quietly, "The letter. Please. Give me 10 minutes." She looked at him for a long moment. Thomas looked at her. She set down the second case. The drawing room held the remnants of the previous night's assembled guests, 7 people who had remained for the following day's shooting party, and who were now assembled in the early morning in varying states of dress, clearly retrieved from their rooms by some instruction from the house. Graves was at the door. Mr. Pryor stood near the window with a leather satchel. Lady Dorothea was in the center of the room in a dressing gown, and the expression of someone who has been asked to perform without preparation, and intends to recover their authority as quickly as possible. Cecily sat beside her in a small chair with her hands folded, her face the careful blank of a young woman who has been told the situation is manageable and is not entirely certain of it. William came into the room with Eliza behind him and Thomas behind her, and the room sorted itself into attention. He did not look at his mother. He did not address Cecily. He stood in the center of the room with the letter open in his hand, and he read from it aloud. Not all of it. The part about the kitchen garden, the part about the gallery, the part that said, "I believe you are a better man than the one you have been practicing being." When he finished reading, the room was entirely still. He folded the letter with one careful motion and put it in his inside coat pocket. And then he said, in the level declarative voice he used for things he had decided and would not be revisiting, "I intend to ask Miss Hartwell to do me the honor of remaining at Ashford Park, not in any capacity of service to this household." A pause of exactly the right length. As its mistress, Lady Dorothea drew a breath, the precise kind of breath that precedes a sentence designed to restore the established order. He looked at her then, not unkindly, but with the absolute steadiness of a man who has decided which ground he is standing on. "Mother," he said, and the single word was sufficient. Her breath was released without the sentence. Pryor moved forward with his satchel. The matter of the entail irregularity, he explained, had been resolved to his satisfaction. The debt recorded against the Hartwell name had originated in a transaction made under conditions that rendered it legally void. He had confirmed it in correspondence with the relevant parties and had the documentation to clear the Hartwell name entirely. The £3,200 were discharged. Miss Eliza Hartwell was a free woman whose choice was entirely her own. He said all of this to the room, but he directed the final sentence at Eliza. She stood very still and received it. Beside her, Thomas let out a breath in the same register she recognized from the gallery. She looked at William. He was watching her with the particular quality of attention she had catalogued since the first evening at Whitmore House, the look that she had told herself meant nothing, and that she now understood had never meant nothing. His face was not composed in the way she had grown accustomed to. It was not precisely unguarded either, but there was something along the line of his jaw and around his eyes that had been there for 33 years and was now gone, loosened by the act of reading her words in front of witnesses, by the specific cost of having crossed a hall at 4:30 in the morning to stop a woman who had not expected to be stopped. She said, "You read my letter to a room full of people," he said. Yes. That was not especially dignified, she said. No, he agreed. And you intend to ask me, she said. You have not yet asked me. The room was very quiet. Lady Dorothea was looking at the middle distance. Cecily had unfolded her hands and refolded them in the other direction, and her expression had shifted into something that was not quite what she had arrived wearing. William looked at Eliza Hartwell with the face of a man who has been practicing not feeling things for 4 years and has run out of practice. He said, "Miss Hartwell, Eliza, will you stay?" Not a long speech. Not a declaration assembled from the components of sentiment. 4 words, and her name in them. Her given name. The name no one in this household had used until this moment. She looked at him for a long time. She looked at the letter-shaped outline in his coat pocket. She looked at Thomas, who was watching her with the expression of a 9-year-old who knows that the adults are making a decision that will matter to him, but has enough dignity not to say so. "Yes," she said, "we will stay." The season ended in the way seasons do, not with a ceremony, but with a gradual withdrawal of the particular pressure that had made every room feel like a courtroom. Cecily Vane returned to her father's house in the 2nd week of July with the quiet grace of someone who has recognized the door has been closed and chooses to exit through it with her posture intact. She curtsied to Eliza in the entrance hall on the morning of her departure, a curtsy that was smaller than the one she had offered Lady Dorothea 6 weeks earlier, and more genuine than any she had managed in between. Lady Dorothea remained at Ashford Park, which was both practical and, Eliza came to understand, something like an act of will on the dowager's part. She did not apologize. She did not explain. She reorganized her mornings to avoid the kitchen garden at the hour when Eliza walked there, and she began addressing Thomas as a person rather than as a category. And one afternoon in August, she showed him the correct way to hold a miniature, to read the painter's mark on its base. It was not warmth. It was something prior to warmth, the clearing of ground. Mr. Pryor returned in August with the final documentation. Eliza received it in the study with William beside her, and read it twice through with the attention of someone who has been carrying a number for 2 years and wants to be sure she has read it correctly. £3,200. Discharged. Void from the date of origin. She set the document on the desk and kept her hands flat on the table and allowed herself, for the first time in 2 years, to not be holding that particular weight. William watched her do it. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The wedding was small, conducted in the estate chapel in early September, with Graves and Mrs. Alderton and Thomas present, and a vicar named Rowe who seemed to find the whole arrangement exactly as it should be. Thomas stood at Eliza's side with the careful composure he had been practicing all year, and shook William's hand afterward with the gravity of someone confirming a binding agreement. By October, Ashford Park had acquired the specific quality of a house that is no longer holding its breath. Fires were laid earlier in the mornings. The East Gallery was open to Thomas at reasonable hours. Eliza's desk was in the study, beside William's, and the kitchen garden had become, by a process of incremental permission, the place where they said things they had not yet found room for elsewhere. The first snow came early that year, in the last week of October, arriving without much announcement on a Tuesday morning when the household was still at breakfast. Thomas heard it first. The particular quiet that snow makes when it is falling on stone, and crossed to the gallery window with his face alight. Eliza stood at the window of the study and watched it come down on the grounds, covering the kitchen garden and the herb border and the long path that ran from the gate to the river. William came to stand beside her. His shoulder was warm against hers through the wool of his coat. Thomas ran through the gallery outside, his boots uneven on the boards, calling something about the footprints in the snow that would need investigating immediately. She had the letter in her mind, the words she had written in the small hours of a June morning. when she believed she was leaving. Not the sentence about the debt or the sentence about the gallery, but the last one before her signature, the one she had almost crossed out. I find I would have liked to stay. She had stayed. William's hand found hers at the window frame, and she turned it upward, and outside the snow went on falling on the grounds of Ashford Park, quiet and unhurried, covering everything that had been, and leaving the new surface plain and unmarked. If Eliza's journey has stayed with you, leave a word in the comments. These stories are built for the people who need them. Come back whenever you like.